Backlight, direct light, blue hour, lighting mastery is really what sets pros apart. And in today's video, I'm breaking down exactly how to use each of these types of natural light to elevate your portraits and wow your clients. Let's dig in. First up, let's talk direct light, when to use it, and some tips on how to use it in a way that's flattering so you're not avoiding this kind of light. Direct light is simply light that comes direct from the source, which is our sun, and depending on the time of day and weather, this can range from soft and diffused to harsh and unforgiving. Shooting with unfiltered light on a super bright, cloudless day is going to create our harshest light that's going to be the least flattering for the majority of subjects. This is especially important for portrait and wedding photographers to know. When shooting models with perfect skin, we can often get away with a lot more, but for clients that are hoping that we're going to minimize their skin imperfections and really trusting that we're going to have their back to make them look their best, hard light is typically going to give us the least ideal lighting for skin. So because of this, I'm mainly using direct light when it's softer and diffused, such as on an overcast or cloudy day. But regardless of if the light is hard with no clouds or soft with some natural diffusion happening, the most important thing to know when shooting with this kind of light is your direction. A simple tip to remember is when you use direct light, direct the face towards the light. And if the sun is high in the sky, you're also going to want to have them tilt their chin slightly, just slightly, up towards the light. Doing this is going to help you avoid any distracting or unflattering shadows on the subject's face, which is going to give you the most flattering, even look, even when utilizing what could be considered a harsher quality of light. So you can really do this at any time of day, even if you're shooting in harsh, undiffused light, and it's gonna give you better results. One thing that I wanted to add to this real quick is that if you've ever heard it said that on super cloudy or overcast days, the light is omnidirectional, meaning that it's just soft and glowy everywhere, and the direction of the light does not matter. This is actually never the case. Light always has a direction, and it always matters, especially on overcast or cloudy days like today. I find it actually matters even more. And the reason for this is it's actually more nuanced and subtle, and it's going to take a more skillful eye. And it's really going to be the difference between an image that's a bit dingier and an image that has this glowy, clean aesthetic to it that is going to be more attractive to those premium high-end clients. So to illustrate this, if I were to just turn in a circle, you'll notice the light shift on my face, and it'll go from being a bit dingier at times, where it's less flattering, more shadows under the eyes, to being a bit glowier and brighter at times. And guess what our dream clients want? They might not know why, but they'll always want that glow. Next, let's dive into backlighting, one of my favorite techniques for creating soft, glowy, natural light portraits. Backlight is especially great for portrait and wedding photographers, or really any photography of people, because of the soft skin tones it can create on our subjects. And it's also one of the lighting techniques that we have in our Pro toolkit that allows us to extend our shooting time all day long, even during what could be considered bad lighting. As a wedding photographer myself, I don't always have the luxury of doing all the portraits during sunset or golden hour. So really knowing how to maximize my light at any time of day, even when there's not shade available, is very, very important. Backlight, I find, is the MVP for this. So this subject can go pretty deep, and that's why I have a full section dedicated to it in my photography course, Shoot to Edit. But I want to help you feel more confident shooting with it right away. So here's 2 pro tips that I find help a lot of my students. First is that when you're using backlight, instead of putting the sun directly behind your subject with your subject between you and the sun, position the sun behind your subject, but slightly to the side. So really the goal is just so that the sun is just outside of your frame so that it's not coming into your lens. I like to call this side backlight. It's backlight, as in the sun is mostly behind your subject, which is going to give you that soft, even light on their face because their face is in the shadow, and also a nice rim light on their hair. But by positioning with the sun slightly off center, you're going to reduce glare and are going to be able to more carefully control the light, letting you craft the perfect look. And if you want flares, if you want like to play with some creative flares, you can even play with slowly letting the light into your lens. And this is going to allow you to do it in a much more intentional way, which allows you to get consistently sharp in focus images and really dial in the look exactly how you want it. My next tip for shooting backlight is on exposure. A really common mistake I often see photographers make, especially ones that are wanting that light and airy look, is blowing out their skies and their highlights. When it comes to exposure, rather than exposing for the subject when shooting with backlight, it's especially important to ensure that you're prioritizing balancing your exposure to really retain the background, sky, and highlight detail. And the reason for this is with digital, we will lose detail in the highlights a lot faster than we lose detail in the shadows. The shadows can most often be lifted even if the image is rather dark, but the highlight detail gets completely lost and you can't bring that back. By the way, quick side note, film is actually the opposite of digital. So if you've ever heard somebody say that you should actually overexpose for better skin tones, that's where this advice is coming from. It's either coming from somebody with a film photography background, which I started in film actually, or it's more likely coming from somebody that learned from somebody with a film photography background without fully understanding where that advice was coming from. When it comes to film, it'll get murky and muddy in the shadows and it will retain in the highlights. And that's why you can overexpose a bit for film for a really creamy look. On the opposite end of the spectrum is digital, where it retains in those shadows and it's easy to lift, but it will lose in those highlights. And this is really important to know unless we're wanting blown out skies, blown out dresses, blown out hair, blown out all the things. We really need to protect that highlight detail. And by doing that, we're going to create more refined, higher end final images. If you want to hear even more on the light and airy style, how to shoot for it, how to edit for it, and also how to avoid some of the most common mistakes, grab my free light and airy mini course. It's short, packed with value, and all linked below. Next, let's chat blue hour lighting. As photographers, golden hour is known as that golden standard of magical shooting time. But one of my personal favorites and probably the least utilized kind of light is blue hour light. One of the things I've noticed is that when I'm out on location, shooting in popular locations for an engagement shoot or a family session, and there's other photographers around, many times they start packing up their gear and heading out right after that sun has dipped. And I'm like, guys, you're missing out on some of the dreamiest light. So for those of you who it's your first time hearing of this kind of light, blue hour is essentially the window of time just before the sun rises or just after the sun sets, when that sky is transitioning from those golden tones to vibrant pinks, purples, and blues, hence the name blue hour. And this creates this really dreamy quality of light and gorgeous color palette that's often overlooked. This light typically lasts about 15 to 20 minutes after you lose the sun, and it really depends on the environment you're shooting in. For instance, if I'm shooting in the city and I'm surrounded by tall buildings, or if it's a stormier day, I know that there's going to be less ambient light, which is going to shorten the amount of time I have of that blue hour light. But one of the things I most love about blue hour is it gives us these beautiful, vibrant skies and stunning natural tones without any artificial lighting required. So one tip for shooting this kind of light well is to turn your subject towards the light source, which in this case is where that sun has recently set. So if you were shooting backlight during golden hour, you'll want to turn them towards the light now. And doing this is going to directly illuminate our subjects while also giving really soft, flattering skin tones. Now, an important thing to note is if you have a specific background in mind, during blue hour, you might be changing directions in order to achieve this look with those deep colors and illuminated subjects. You definitely want to plan things in advance accordingly. If the background you want doesn't work for shifting directions like that, you can also get this look by shooting before sunrise. So I always just look at, okay, where is my shooting location and where is the sun rising or setting from so that I can ensure I'm getting the best light for what I want. My personal preference is, even though I love sunrise shoots, when going for a blue hour look, I actually prefer sunset just because the timing is so short and I work with a lot of couples and families who aren't models, aren't used to being in front of the camera. So this really ensures that they have enough time to feel fully warmed up so that I can truly take advantage of those 15 to 20 minutes of magic. Now that you've learned how to create better natural light portraits, you might be wondering how to edit for them to get those dreamy, polished results. That's why your next step is to watch this video here, where I'll walk you through my favorite editing techniques for natural light portraits. And don't forget, if you want even more tips on the light and airy style, grab my free mini course linked up below, and I'll catch you in the next video.